Hi, this is Larry Bauer, Chief Executive Officer Emeritus of the Family Medicine Education Consortium. And I have to tell you, I'm very excited today to be talking with Dr. Jeff Heck and also Dr. James Orbinski, who, just for the record, is the only family physician I know of who was part of receiving a Nobel Peace Prize for his organization's humanitarian work. What I'm going to do here is I'll first introduce Dr. Heck. Dr. Heck served as CEO of the Mountain Area Health Education Center and Associate Dean of the UNC School of Medicine in Asheville from February 2012 to February 2022. He attended Vanderbilt University Medical College of Ohio and completed a family practice residency program at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Dayton. He spent 4 years in rural solo practice in the early 1980s, a year in Kenya at Mission Hospital prior to a 19-year career as faculty at the University of Cincinnati School of Medicine with a focus on global health. During that time, he had 6-month sabbaticals working for WHO in Geneva, Switzerland. He helped found the not-for-profit organization Shoulder to Shoulder in 1990 to provide much needed healthcare services in poor rural Honduras communities, and served as its executive director for more than 20 years. In 2004, he moved to Asheville to serve as director of the Mayheck Division of Family Medicine, where he also founded the Asheville campus of the UNC School of Medicine. Dr. Heck has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the University of Cincinnati and the University of California.
North Carolina.
North Carolina. I'm off by a few states. Sorry, Jeff. He has been married to his wife, Kathy, for 46 years. They have 5 grown children and 14 grandchildren. Dr. James Orbinski is a medical director, humanitarian practitioner, and advocate, best-selling author, and a leading scholar in global health. Dr. Orbinski believes in actively engaging and shaping our world so that it is more just, fair, and humane. He is professor and inaugural director of York University's Davdala Institute for Global Health Research and professor of medicine, clinical public health at the University of Toronto. He has worked providing medical humanitarian relief in situations of war, famine, epidemic disease, and genocide with Doctors Without Borders. He was elected international president of Doctors Without Borders in 1998 through 2001 and accepted the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Doctors Without Borders in 1999. He is the author of the award-winning and best-selling book An Imperfect Offering, Humanitarian in the 21st Century. He was co-chair of the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Working Group, which launched the not-for-profit Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. He also co-founded Dignitas International, which started and maintained more than 375,000 people in Malawi on full treatment for HIV/AIDS, actively conducted and published more than 100 research papers, and trained more than 12,000 Malawian healthcare workers. His current work focuses on developing new infectious disease control tools to improve humanitarian assistance in refugee camp and IDP settings, and using computer modeling, artificial intelligence, and machine learning for better humanitarian and clinical public health interventions in response to pandemic diseases like COVID-19, and in response to the health impacts of global warming in the global South. He is an officer of the Order of Canada and has received the Meritorious Service Cross for his leadership in providing direct medical relief in Kigali during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. An avid canoeist, Dr. Orbinski lives in Guelph, Canada, with his wife and their 3 teenagers. Thank you both for joining with. And to start things off, Dr. Orbinski, could you give us a little bit, talk about your roots, how you got started, how you found your way into medicine and family medicine, and into your work with Doctors Without Borders?
Great. Yes, of course, Larry. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the podcast series. And it's a real pleasure to meet you, Larry, and also you, Jeff. So in answer to your question, just in a nutshell, I was born in the UK to Irish parents. Despite the name Orbinski, both my parents were born and raised in Ireland, and all my family is in Ireland, all my extended family. And we came to Canada when I was a young boy. I was 7, to Montreal, and there I grew up. And I went to college in Montreal, and then started thinking a little bit about my future. And seriously, what did I actually want to do as a career path? And I was fascinated with international relations. Didn't know anything about it other than what one would glean from a newspaper, but I was truly fascinated with it. And also I was quite taken with the practicality of medicine, that you can actually do very practical things to help people in very difficult circumstances. So I applied to medical school, and I also applied for a PhD in international relations. I was accepted in both. And I thought, well, I'll try medicine. If I don't like it, I'll do a PhD. I went to McMaster for medicine, and I fell in love with it. Literally from the very first day, I was just completely enamored with medicine, and most especially because of the system that McMaster uses to teach. It's problem-based learning. It's small group, tutorial-based, self-directed learning, under the guidance of highly seasoned and experienced academic and clinical mentors. My first mentor was a person who I still consider a real hero, Jack Rosenfeld. And he was an immunologist, and he loved immunology. And obviously that love of his science, he communicated that just floridly and openly in our tutorials. And I fell in love with immunology. And so I started working, doing some work in his lab as a first-year medical student. To make a long story short, at that time, HIV was a new and virtually unknown disease, unexplored, I should say, disease, and most especially in children. So I developed a strong interest in pediatric HIV. And I got a fellowship, a research fellowship, to go to Rwanda to study HIV in children. And I did a bunch of clinical studies there under 2 amazing mentors, Philippe Van Duper and Philippe Lepage. Once in Rwanda, again, I fell in love, with the world of possibility, that I could see what I could do in terms of medicine. And I could see that there was virtually just uncharted waters and an ocean of need. And with a carefully kind of constructed approach to addressing some of those needs, one could have a huge impact in terms of how one lives one life, but also in terms of how one applies one's knowledge. And with that, the organization that I'd heard about that really just captured my imagination was Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders in English. And so I learned about it, and myself and a group of friends in Canada, under the leadership of a really visionary friend, Richard Heinzel, we started a chapter of Doctors Without Borders in Canada. The rest is essentially history. I joined, of course, and my first mission was in Peru, then Somalia during the famine and civil war in 1992-93, then in Afghanistan as the Taliban were coming to power, and fighting obviously with other factions within Afghanistan. Then in Rwanda, 94, I was head of mission in Rwanda during the genocide. Then again in 96, 97, I was head of mission in Goma, Zaire, during a major refugee crisis. I then did a master's degree in international relations, going back to my original set of questions, which were really deeply informed by my experience globally. And I really focused on what is humanitarianism and what is the relationship of this desire to quote unquote do good. What is the relationship of that to formal hardball politics? And how do you create an actual humanitarian space? How do you actually engage the very forces that make your actions necessary, and at some level either deny the causality of that relationship, and then on another level actually seek to benefit from that relationship? So they want to be seen as good, and allowing humanitarianism and so on and so on. So I really wanted to explore those questions, and which I did. And then I was asked to run as president of the organization, and I ran and I was elected. And we launched the Access to Essential Medicines campaign. That was one of the first things that I was able to do. And that campaign just kind of changed the whole face of HIV from a global health perspective. And probably the single largest thing that we did there that was the main catalyst was we just drove down the price of antiretrovirals, and we reformulated the argument around prevention versus treatment. And we basically said, prevention is treatment, treatment is prevention. And specifically in the context of a global pandemic, these things are not neatly separated. The idea that the individual is not part of a collective, or that the collective doesn't influence an individual, this is just simply naive. And so we took that basic argument, made it very forcefully and strongly around the world, and we also took very concrete actions to essentially corner the market on generic medicines, and we drove down the price of antiretrovirals from around $14,000 per person per patient per year to less than $200 for generic versions of exactly the same medicine. And we also launched a major campaign at the World Trade Organization to entrench compulsory licensing and parallel importation, which are two policy tools that are embedded in World Trade agreements that allow for pursuit of the public good by the state in the face of existential crises like HIV, and now today like COVID. And then after that, I finished the term as president, and then I was chair of the MSF working group on neglected tropical diseases. And that process led to the creation of a not-for-profit company called the DNDI, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. And that initiative has now researched and launched many new treatments for neglected tropical diseases, including vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutic interventions, drugs. And then I was involved, I was co-founder of Dignitas International, which you talked about, Larry. And now I'm at York University and at University of Toronto. And I'm currently at York. I'm director of the Dadala Institute for Global Health Research. And there we focus on planetary health, global health and humanitarianism, and what we loosely call global health foresighting. And those three themes really structure our research agenda. And we have a whole bunch of really, I can think, path-breaking research initiatives around planetary health, global health and humanitarianism, and global health foresighting. And they deal with, creating, as you mentioned, Larry, new tools for optimizing better health outcomes, especially for refugees and for people who are internally displaced in their country because of war or social unrest or whatever. And then also we have a big initiative on COVID itself, a global partnership initiative, a network initiative, where we do modeling essentially using artificial intelligence and machine learning to maximize the effectiveness of that modeling, so that nations and primarily ministries of health are better able to structure their policy responses and their daily their daily clinical public health interventions. So that kind of gives you maybe a little bit too long, but also a thumbnail of my past and where I am now. Does that help?
It's very helpful. Jeff, I'm going to turn things over to you.
So I appreciate so much your comments, James. And one of the things for our listeners, it would be helpful to remind them, if you read Dr. Orbinski's book, you will see that the conclusions that he's come to about what makes a difference and what strategies make a difference, you're quickly aware that it came at a lot of great personal sacrifice, that Dr. Orbinski is not somebody who hasn't gotten his hands dirty in the field, both at the patient care level, the political and governmental level. And such things are really difficult and can only come by a lot of hard driving passions. And I have a couple of questions. There are actually 4 questions that really are trying to get at the kind of things that hopefully will inspire younger physicians, medical students, academicians. So the first one is, you and your colleagues at Médecins Sans Frontières have all made and continue to make incredible personal sacrifices for your patients and your communities. Do you perceive that the 21st century Western doctors as humanitarian servants to their communities, do they have that? And is our professional ethic as physicians now different than it was when you graduated from medical school?
I don't think it is. I think, I would just answer Jeff by saying that in the first instance, when I talk to, even now, when I talk to young people who are thinking about applying to medicine, overwhelmingly, the thing that I see is a genuine desire to care for others, right? A genuine wish to use their mind, their time, their life energy in a way that is beneficial to others. And that is, that's a uniquely, I believe, a uniquely human characteristic, this ability to cultivate compassion for others, and then to wisely ask yourself, how do I use my mind, my time, my energy, my potential to most effectively respond to the suffering of others? And it's that, I mean, that's my formulation, but everyone has their own way of formulating these questions, these issues. But overwhelmingly, I still see that, and in young students, young people who want to enter the health professions, whether it's nursing or medicine or public health, whatever it is. And I think, that is that intention is the most important thing to identify, and then also to cultivate and to keep at front and center. Now, what one does with that, and how institutions like medical schools or whatever, how they shape that, I think that has changed dramatically over the course of my career. I think medicine has become vastly improved in terms of new technologies, new approaches, new tools, new ways of thinking rationally about causes and conditions of wellness and also of disease. I think, though, that's become almost too technocratic, and the kind of logical specificity that approach that has created some incredible new approaches. And I'm not in any way saying they're not good. I think it has overpowered in many ways that primary intention that I just spoke about. And I think we really do need to find in our institutions, we need to find ways to maintain that intention, right? And to value that intention and give it primacy of place through which these new tools, these new technologies, these new approaches are used and applied. And it's in many ways, it's when one takes a kind of a logical, rational approach to a problem, the logic only applies as long as the problem and its dynamic and its elements remain fixed and remain certain and remain predictable. But we know, the three of us know, we all have enough gray hair to know that very little in life remains fixed, remains immutable, remains unchanging. And we also know, or at least I know, that is particularly true when we're thinking about political systems. And political systems are really the fundamental sort of causal structure that defines who's in and who's out. And if you're out, boy, that's not a nice place to be. And if you're trying to act, within a system as a humanitarian, you have to be able to be flexible. You have to be able to reimagine constantly the causes and conditions that lead to a particular outcome, and that either limit or enable the application of the tools that your institutions, your profession has created. But the key thing is the intention, is the motivation. Why? Why are you doing this? And how then, in these changing causes and conditions, how do I maintain that intention, and how do I practically, in these changing causes and conditions, how do I practically help other people who are really, in some circumstances, like what you've described, Larry, are really in the most extreme and the most difficult, and that is, I say that euphemistically, the most difficult of circumstances. How do you behave? How do you operate? How do you act in that situation? And I think that's ultimately the key question, for the quote unquote humanitarian. And the same for the practicing clinical doctor in the United States or Canada or Europe. Our political systems are constantly changing, not in a manner that is as extreme as in war, but they are constantly changing, and there's a constant debate and dialogue and debate and sometimes fight and polarization around who's in, who's out, who gets treatment, who doesn't get treatment, who pays, who doesn't pay, and so on and so on. So the challenge is to maintain your intention and to be flexible, right? But to never forget that the number one thing that you do as a physician, and that makes you successful as a physician, is to act on that intention, to help others who don't have choices and who don't have the knowledge that you have and don't have the tools that you have access to.
It's very reminiscent of Francis Peabody's classical article, "The Care of the Patient," published in 1937, the most read article in JAMA ever. Again, focusing on the importance of technology, but also the most important thing is to focus on the patient with the intention on, I have a challenge to heal my patient. And I'm wondering, James, do you think if you think about being a dean of a medical school or a minister of health, could you change medical education to continue to light an inspirational fire under your learners, to hold fast to that intention? Or is it a curriculum? How is it done practically at the level of medical education?
I think, it's a great question. I think there's certainly an element of curriculum. But I wouldn't emphasize that. I mean, I think there has to obviously be an element of curriculum, and it begins literally from day one, with a declaration of, intent. Like, why are we here? Or what are we doing here? Are we here to be a high income earner? Or are we here to learn the skills and knowledge to be able to care for people in the most difficult of circumstances, right? Being very clear about that. The other major curricular element, I would say, is ethics. So bioethics from 1960s through to today. I mean, they only literally emerged formally in the 60s. And then they've within medicine, and then they've evolved and taken many different forms. And I'm not saying that medicine was unethical before 1960. What I'm saying is that the formal discipline of bioethics emerged, and I think it has really become a very useful set of tools within clinical practice. And offers some very powerful analytical tools that help one, maintain clarity about one's purpose and what you're doing, and also create a rationale for difficult moral choices. So that after the fact, you can go back and you can say, well, was that the right rationale? And oh, yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. Well, where did we make the moral judgment, the error in judgment? Right? And how do we modify our future practice? I think that's an incredible addition to medical practice. And I do think there's a really important role for a curricular presence of bioethics in medical training. But I think the most powerful thing, more important than curriculum, but informed by curriculum, is mentorship. And that's how to put it? It's a dialogic process. It's not transactional. You're not checking boxes, right? Oh, I read this paper. I read that paper. I got a 95 on this test, or whatever. It's not transactional. It's truly dialogic. And when I think of one of the great philosophers that I just always loved is this guy Emmanuel Levinas. And he wrote a beautiful philosophy, but it's all sort of summarized in the title of one of his books. And the title of the book is called Face to Face. And essentially it says that when I am with you and when I see your face and you see my face, we create in that experience a mutuality. And I see you and you see me. I am not you, you are not me, but I am seen because you see me, right? And in that process, that is a dialogic process, right? And in that dialogic process, there's the greatest possibility of deep mentorship, of deep learnings, a mutual learning, right? So a great mentor is not one who has a curriculum. They have some ideas about what they want to impart, but what they do is they respond to the other person, to that student, that patient, that whatever, that other person, and they respond to who they are now, right? And then they work with them to bring them to a new way of seeing, a new way of being, right? And the student or the patient, it's exactly the same thing. They see the mentor, the doctor or whoever, not as some, deified, sort of persona, but as a human being. Now you create that in terms of how you approach others. And in that dialogic relationship, mentorship, real mentorship that actually fundamentally cultivates and nurtures a particular perspective, that can emerge. And not only can, but very much does emerge. And so I think, it's something that it sounds very fluffy, but it's actually very well described and historically something that has been practiced for hundreds of years in our Western culture and in many other cultures. And I think we need, within the medical profession, I think we need to rediscover that. And I'm not saying it's completely absent, but boy, has it taken a back seat. I think we need to rediscover that and reprioritize, reprivilege the power of mentorship in terms of maintaining and cultivating the kind of intention that we're talking about.
Well, you make a great case for greater investment in all of our training programs for mentorship, true mentorship, as you have described it. I mean, it takes time. It takes time from productivity or from the electronic health record or whatever happens to be the distraction of the day. So I'm really happy to hear you mention that so clearly. And I would say, once again, this is not meaning to continuously plug your book, but you describe many instances where ethical decisions are sometimes made in the dark night, or the fly of the right at the moment, when you're not sure which is right and which is wrong. They often come flying at you in multiple urgent ways, and I think you have a wonderful platform to speak about medical ethic decision making. A good plug for your book. So,
well, thank you, Jeff.
You put me on the speaking circuit with you. So the next thing that I wanted to ask you about is, so MSF and other organizations meet acute humanitarian crisis needs frequently. And I was going to ask you, who meets the long-term post-crisis needs, particularly in situations where the health care delivery system has been targeted during conflicts, sometimes even decimated?
Yeah. Well, typically we think of long-term systems as a responsibility of government, to set up either the enabling conditions. I know in America, the United States, the system is very different than it is really anywhere else in the world. It's a different system, and it's one where government is responsible for setting up the framework, if you will, and then private actors act within that framework. And it's, I think, generously variably successful. I'll just leave it at that. Outside of the United States, it's very much recognized by citizens and by society at large, by political actors within systems, the provision of the structures and the systems for long-term health and wellness. This is very much a responsibility of government. And that's not to say that there aren't private actors. There's private actors in Canada. Family doctors in Canada are essentially small businesses that act within a very clear structure. The same is true in continental Europe. The same is really true across the OECD, but it's much more specific, right? In terms of the interventions of government, not interventions, but responsibilities of government. And so it's quite important, I think, that we recognize that, and also recognize that governments sometimes fail, right? Often fail, not infrequently. And in those situations, and especially in war, in situations of social unrest, social instability, limited state capacity, and so on, in those situations, typically non-government organizations function, and UN agencies function. And UN agencies and non-government organizations, they function in one of two ways. One is humanitarian, so in the acute crisis, where there's overwhelming need and virtually limited capacity or no capacity, then the UN and civil society organizations like MSF function, and the Red Cross. That's where they function. Now, outside of the acute crisis, there are also UN agencies and a whole suite of non-government organizations that are engaged in what generally is described as development. But I think the thing that's really important is that we don't forget the first responsibility, which is the responsibility of society, a nation, a country, a government, to ensure that the basic healthcare needs and wellness needs of their society, of their country, of their population, that there's a system in place that can address those healthcare needs and their wellness needs. And that is really important. And NGO, non-government organizations, should not be a substitute for government, right? They should not be a substitute for effective policy and practice that allow for effective and equitable delivery of health care and wellness care when circumstances require that.
So Jeff, can I interrupt, because I know our time is beginning to run short, and I have a burning question that's been on my mind since I read your book, James. And I have to say, reading your book, I mean, I knew a little bit about a number of the crises, Rwanda, Sudan, et cetera, where you were engaged. But reading in your book, it really puts the reader right there along with you. And I have to say, you've been in the midst of some of the most hellacious, god-awful circumstances that human beings can experience. The brutality, and not only the physical brutality, but also the, call it emotional, social, where one group is just tearing apart another group. And so I wanted to know, how do you, as a human being, as a humanitarian, as a physician, how do you sustain your inner equanimity? You're just who you are. I would imagine it would wear down the best of any human being seeing all that. So wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's there's a wealth of possible ways I could approach that question, Larry. I will say that I think the world as I know it, you may be surprised to hear this, but the world as I know it is an incredibly beautiful place. And I just literally, almost every day there's something that just takes my breath away, literally takes my breath away. I just think, wow, that is the most beautiful scenery. That's the most beautiful little gesture, of that child to that other child. That is the most beautiful piece of art, that I've seen. I mean, that just draws me, it holds me, it captures me, it inspires me. And I think, there's a certain, I don't know quite how to answer in a pithy, sort of short way, but I will say that I realize every single day that the world has been here a lot longer than me. And the world will be here a lot longer after I'm gone. And I'm just a little flash of being, and in my life, it feels like I'm 62 as of 3 days ago. I like you guys, I think, you probably ache, in the places where you used to play. I sure do. Those old injuries, oh my God, that, but I just feel, that it's such a gift, to be here, right? To be alive, and to experience this world, right? And to see the things, the beauty of this world. But also, as you rightly point out, Larry, I've seen some pretty brutal things as well. And in those things, those on the surface, very brutal circumstances, there are things you can do, right? There are very practical things that can be done. And why not do them, to help others? Like, why would I not do that, right? And, I feel, very, very powerfully that every circumstance offers an opportunity, right, to improve that circumstance. And I've witnessed, and I describe this in my book many, many times. I describe it, but I've witnessed even more, these incredible acts of courage, these incredible acts of kindness, in the most unimaginably difficult situations, genocide, war, famine, epidemic disease, that just constantly rekindle and fill me up, with that beauty, right? That hope, that desire, and that will to use my energy in the way that I think is best. And that's the other thing I will say that a little very quick story. I was president of MSF for 3 years, and they wanted me to renew, and stay on for another 3 years. And I was traveling constantly, and sometimes 3 continents in 1 week, and it's brutal, for you physically, and then dealing with these very difficult situations and people, when you show up as the president of an organization like MSF, everybody knows there's a problem, right? Like, you're not there because everything's great. You're there because there's a problem, So it was really, really challenging. And my wife, my then girlfriend, we were talking about getting married. We weren't sure. And when they were asking me whether or not I would renew, I really reflected deeply on it. And I remember I put on our fridge in Brussels, where we were living at the time. I put on the fridge one morning a little Post-it note that said, "I choose love," right? And that was my decision. I chose to get married, to have children, and to put our energy, my wife and myself, to put our energy into loving those children, and nurturing. And that's what we did. Now, I've certainly done other things in addition to that, but that was a choice. And I think in a certain way, there are these moments of choice, and in every situation offers a moment of choice, and every situation offers a possibility. And I just knew, and for that story, that example I give you, I knew that there were others who could step in and do what I was doing as president, and it was time for others to do it. And I also knew that my time, my energy, I wanted to put it where my wife and I have put it over the last 19 years now with our children. And professionally, I've certainly continued, created the DNDi, Dignitas, now running this research center. I'm traveling a lot, nowhere near what I did before. And I take my kids with me. I'm going to Malawi and South Africa at the end of the week, and I'm taking 2 of my teenagers with me. And they're going to be helping me in a major research workshop that we're doing on modeling the health impacts of climate change. with our partners in South Africa and Malawi and so on. So there's my answer, Larry. I know it's long and convoluted, but there it is.
That's perfect. And I'm going to use this moment to bring things to closure. And I want to thank you, Dr. Orbinski, for being here today and for being the person that you are, that has done and is continuing to be of service to humanity. And Dr. Heck, I want to thank you also. You and I have known each other from a long, long time. And I've just treasured the opportunity and to go down to Honduras with you and to experience the great work you have been doing. So thank you to both of you. You're both role models for not just medical students, but for all of humanity regarding what is possible as a human being. So thank you very much.
A real pleasure and wonderful to meet you, Jeff, and also you, Larry.